The crowd murmured with excitement as the auctioneer's booming voice echoed through the grand hall, bouncing off crystalline walls adorned with tacky holographic advertisements. Jack slouched against a marble pillar, lazily swirling a drink that tasted like burnt motor oil and regret. He wasn't here to buy anything, just kill time and maybe snag a free snack or two. But then, something caught his eye. Inside a glass dome at the center of the stage, perched on a velvet cushion, was the most strikingly tiny creature he'd ever seen. Her features were sharp yet delicate, her skin shimmering faintly like polished silver. She paced back and forth, glaring at the audience with an intensity that seemed far too large for her size. Her lips moved in rapid-fire alien speech, but the translator on Jack's wrist only spat out garbled nonsense. "Ladies and gentlemen, feast your eyes on Lot 27, the auctioneer declared. "A one-of-a-kind ornamental beauty, tamed and trained for your pleasure. Guaranteed to add an exotic touch to any collection." Jack squinted. Ornamental beauty? The hell kind of auction was this? The alien in the glass crossed her arms and muttered something sharp. Though her words didn't translate, her middle finger, yes, that universal gesture, spoke loud and clear. "She doesn't look very tamed," Jack muttered, smirking into his drink. "Opening bid at 5,000 credits," the auctioneer bellowed. The crowd erupted with raised hands, their eager bids rolling in faster than the auctioneer could count. Jack wasn't the heroic type, but something about the scene gnawed at him. Maybe it was the fire in her eyes, or the sheer indignity of cramming a clearly intelligent being into a decorative prison. Either way, before he knew it, his hand shot up. 15,000! Jack called out. The crowd fell silent, heads swiveling to identify the lunatic who just tripled the highest bid. The auctioneer's eyebrows climbed so high they threatened to leave his forehead. We have 15,000 credits. Any other bids?" Jack felt a twinge of regret, but maintained his cocky grin. The other bidders hesitated, eyeing Jack like he just set fire to their wallets. The auctioneer tapped his gavel. "Going once, going twice." "Sold! To the gentleman in the stained jacket!" The room erupted in polite applause. Jack shoved his drink into a passing waiter's hand and swaggered toward the stage, trying not to think about how this decision was going to tank his savings. As the glass dome was lowered, the tiny alien glared at him with enough heat to melt steel. "You're welcome," Jack said as he scooped her up, cradling her in his palm. "Cura tal vash, asterisk," she hissed, but his translator couldn't keep up. Yeah, love you too." Jack pocketed her, ignoring the furious squeaks coming from his jacket. The auctioneer handed over a receipt with a smarmy smile, and Jack nodded like he wasn't planning to bolt the second he got outside. "Pleasure doing business," Jack said. He strolled out of the auction house, his casual pace betraying none of the urgency pounding in his chest. The moment he hit the alley, he yanked her out of his pocket and held her at eye level. "All right, Spitfire," he said. "What's your deal? Diplomat? Heiress? Stubborn flea with a superiority complex?" She jabbed a tiny finger at him, her tone dripping with venom. Fascia Tom Redar. Keep la funka, asterisk. The translator finally caught up. "You oversized, brainless ape! Put me down before I shred you!" Jack burst out laughing. "Shred me? What, with your little doll hands? Don't make me laugh. Oh wait, too late." The alien's silver cheeks flushed a darker hue, her glare sharpening. "You're a moron, aren't you? Do you even realize what you've done? Yeah, I saved you from being someone's living keychain. You're welcome. Saved me? You bought me, you idiot!" Jack blinked. "Oh. Yeah, I guess it does look bad from your side," she groaned, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Listen carefully, human. My name is Lyria, Ambassador Lyria of the Silver Veil. I was captured while on a diplomatic mission. My captors shrank me and sold me as a pet to humiliate me and my people." "Wow. That's a lot of exposition for someone who just called me a moron," Jack said, grinning. Lyria balled her fists. "And you, of all people, thought this was a good time to swoop in like some deranged hero and make things worse? I didn't think it could get worse than being stuck in a fishbowl, but hey, if I'm wrong, feel free to file a complaint. She let out a frustrated scream, her voice barely louder than a squeaky toy. Jack couldn't help but laugh again, even as her glare promised vengeance. You're lucky I don't have my plasma staff, she muttered. Lucky me, Jack said, tucking her back into his pocket. Now shut up and stay quiet. We've got company. The sound of heavy boots echoed in the alleyway. Jack peeked around the corner and spotted a group of armed thugs scanning the crowd. Friends of yours? Jack whispered. Enemies, Lyria hissed. Great. Time for Plan B. What's Plan B? Run like hell. Jack bolted down the alley, Lyria's indignant protests muffled by his jacket. For a guy who just spent 15 grand on a tiny alien, he was remarkably good at making quick exits. Jack darted through the maze of grimy alleys behind the auction house, his boots slapping against the uneven ground. Inside his pocket, Lyria was furiously protesting her current accommodations, her tiny fists beating against the fabric like an enraged cricket. Can you at least stop squirming? Jack hissed, ducking behind a stack of crates. Put me down, you idiot! I can handle myself. Her muffled voice shot back. Yeah, I'm sure your 2-inch tall ass is a real powerhouse against a gang of armed thugs, Jack muttered. She didn't dignify that with a response, though he swore he heard her growling. As he peeked around the corner, his suspicions were confirmed. The goons from the auction house were fanning out, their ugly mugs scanning for any sign of him. One of them barked something into a communicator, and Jack cursed under his breath. You really know how to make enemies, don't you? He whispered. I wouldn't have enemies if you hadn't dragged me out in the most conspicuous way possible. You're welcome, by the way. He shot back, slipping through a narrow gap between two buildings. You could show a little gratitude instead of... Gratitude? You bought me! Jack rolled his eyes, pressing his back against the wall. Semantics. The important thing is we're both still breathing, so maybe let's save the lecture until we're not being hunted like space rabbits. Unbelievable, she muttered. I've been reduced to this, riding around in some human's filthy pocket. My ancestors weep for me. Jack grinned despite himself. Filthy? I'll have you know this jacket is vintage. It smells like regret and fried meat. I like to call that charm, but thanks for noticing. The banter was cut short as heavy footsteps rounded the corner. Jack's muscles tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol strapped to his thigh. One of the thugs, a hulking brute with a face like a deflated balloon, paused near their hiding spot, sniffing the air like some kind of predator. Jack held his breath. Lyria, for once, stayed silent. Smells like someone's nearby. The brute growled, his voice as gravelly as a landslide. Great observation, genius, one of his companions quipped. Maybe if you sniff harder, you'll find your lost brain cells. Jack almost chuckled at that, but he shoved the urge down. He waited until the footsteps faded, then darted across the alley, his heart pounding. All right, Jack whispered, ducking into the cargo hold of an abandoned shuttle. We're clear. For now. Clear? You call this clear? They're still out there. Relax, princess. I've got a plan. Oh, this should be good, Lyria said dryly. Let me guess, does it involve running headfirst into more danger? Not this time, Jack said, grinning. He gently pulled her out of his pocket and set her down on a crate, her tiny form glaring up at him like an angry figurine. We're going to need to be smarter about this if we want to get you out of here in one piece. She crossed her arms. I failed to see how a man who thought yelling 15,000 in a room full of criminals qualifies as smart. Jack smirked, leaning against the crate. Hey, it worked, didn't it? Debatable, she muttered. Look, Lyria, or Ambassador, or whatever you want me to call you. Your savior, she interjected. Sure, let's go with that, he said with a roll of his eyes. Point is, you're stuck with me for now. So unless you've got a better idea. I do, she said sharply, cutting him off. Get me to a communication relay. If I can send a secure signal to my people, they'll come for me. Jack arched an eyebrow. And why didn't you just say that earlier? Because I was too busy being manhandled by a reckless idiot. Touché, Jack said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. All right, fine. We'll find your relay. But until then, you're going to have to trust me. Her silver eyes narrowed. Trust you? You're a criminal. Rogue traitor, he corrected. There's a difference. One sounds cooler. She scoffed. I'd trust a hungry weasel over you. Jack grinned unfazed. Fair enough. But I'm all you've got, so maybe dial down the attitude a notch, huh? Fine, she said through gritted teeth. But if you do anything stupid… Yeah, you'll shred me, I know, he said, waving her off. Now hang tight, Spitfire. We've got work to do. Lyria muttered something in her native tongue that Jack was pretty sure wasn't a compliment. As he secured the crate and checked his pistol, he couldn't help but chuckle. This was going to be one hell of a partnership. Jack's ship was a floating disaster, and Lyria wasted no time pointing it out. This is what you call a starship, she said, her voice laced with incredulity. It looks like it's held together with duct tape and misplaced confidence. Hey, Jack shot back, sidestepping a suspiciously loose floor panel. This piece of junk has gotten me out of more scrapes than I can count. Show some respect. She scoffed, crossing her arms as she perched on the edge of his console. Respect is earned, and so far you've done little to impress me. Jack smirked, leaning back in his chair. Oh, don't worry, Princess. You'll be swooning in no time. Swooning? Over this? She gestured to him, her tone dripping with disdain. The only thing I'm swooning over is the thought of leaving this disaster behind. Harsh, Jack said, feigning a wounded expression. But I'll take it. Now, let's talk strategy. If we're gonna hit up a relay station, we'll need to… Wait, Lyria interrupted, narrowing her eyes at the monitor. What is that? Jack followed her gaze to a blinking red light on his dashboard. His grin faltered. That's probably nothing. Just a minor systems glitch. A glitch that's sending out an active distress signal? She asked, her voice rising. Jack winced. Okay, so maybe it's not nothing. Before he could finish, the ship jolted violently, throwing them both off balance. Lyria tumbled into Jack's lap with an indignant squeak, her tiny hands bracing against his chest. Great, she muttered. Now I'm stuck on a death trap with a half-wit. Jack ignored her jab, focusing instead on the incoming proximity alert. A swarm of small, hostile ships was closing in fast. Well, looks like we've got company, he said, flipping a series of switches. What did you do this time? Lyria demanded, scrambling to regain her footing. Nothing. Probably, Jack said defensively. Okay, maybe I stole some cargo last month that belonged to a less than forgiving syndicate, but that's hardly my fault. She shot him a glare that could have melted steel. You're unbelievable. Yeah, I get that a lot, Jack said, yanking on the control stick as the ship lurched into motion. The first blast rocked the hull, sending sparks flying across the cockpit. Lyria clung to a nearby panel for balance, her expression equal parts fury and panic. Are you even capable of flying this thing? She shouted over the din. Relax. I've got this under control, Jack replied, though the sweat on his brow suggested otherwise. The ship banked sharply, narrowly avoiding a volley of plasma bolts. Jack's movements were quick and precise, but there was an undeniable recklessness to his flying that left Lyria gripping the edge of her perch with white-knuckled intensity. This is your idea of control? She yelled, her tiny frame bouncing with each jolt. Hey, I'm still alive, aren't I? Jack quipped, flashing her a grin. Debatable. Despite the chaos, there was a strange rhythm to their banter, as if arguing with each other was the only thing keeping them sane. All right, Jack said, flipping another switch. Hold on to something. We're about to try something experimental. Define experimental, Lyria said warily. Jack didn't answer. Instead, he slammed his fist down on a big, glowing button labeled Do not press. The ship's engines roared to life, and they shot forward at an alarming speed. The sudden acceleration plastered Lyria against the console, her tiny voice erupting into a string of colorful curses that the translator struggled to keep up with. Jack laughed, exhilarated. See? Nothing to it. Asterisk, you lunatic, asterisk. Lyria screeched, scrambling to her feet as the ship leveled out. Are you trying to kill us? Not yet, Jack said with a wink. But the day's young. As the hostile ships fell behind, the tension in the cockpit began to ease. Lyria shot him a withering glare, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. You're the worst pilot I've ever had the misfortune of meeting, she said. Jack leaned back in his chair, a smug grin on his face. And yet here we are. Alive and kicking. You're welcome. Don't mistake survival for skill, she snapped. Jack chuckled. You know, you're kinda cute when you're mad. Her silver skin darkened in what Jack assumed was her species' version of a blush. Don't push your luck, human. Hey, just calling it like I see it, Jack said, raising his hands in mock surrender. Now, how about we figure out where this relay station of yours is before we get ambushed again? Lyria sighed, clearly reluctant but aware that she didn't have much choice. Fine. But if you pull another stunt like that, I'll personally see to it that you never sit comfortably again. Jack winced but couldn't suppress a grin. Noted. As Lyria rattled off coordinates, Jack couldn't help but steal a glance at her. She was fiery, stubborn, and infuriatingly bossy, but there was something undeniably captivating about her. Maybe this mission wasn't going to be so bad after all. The relay station was nestled in the middle of nowhere, a forgotten hunk of metal orbiting a desolate moon, surrounded by debris that shimmered faintly against the backdrop of endless space. Jack approached with caution, his eyes flicking between the console and the viewport. Looks quiet, he muttered, though his tone suggested he didn't believe his own words. Lyria, perched on the dashboard, examined the station with a critical eye. Too quiet, she said. Are you sure this thing is operational? Relax, Spitfire. If it's not, we'll just fix it. Your confidence terrifies me, she deadpanned. Jack grinned, guiding the ship into a docking bay that had clearly seen better days. The station creaked and groaned as the airlock engaged, and a series of flickering lights illuminated the pathway ahead. Stay close, Jack said, strapping a pistol to his hip. Don't worry, Lyria replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. I'd hate to lose my fearless leader in this maze of structural decay. Jack smirked, motioning for her to climb onto his shoulder. She hesitated but ultimately relented, her tiny hands gripping the edge of his collar for balance. Comfortable? Jack asked. Barely, she shot back. They stepped into the station, the air thick with the scent of stale oxygen and rust. Lyria scanned their surroundings, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. This place hasn't been maintained in years, she said. Yeah, well, beggars can't be choosers, Jack replied, tapping on his wrist communicator. You said you needed a relay. This is what I've got. And here I thought humans were supposed to be resourceful, she muttered. Careful, Jack said, smirking. You might hurt my feelings. Lyria ignored him, her focus shifting to a terminal embedded in the wall. This should work, she said, leaping from his shoulder to the console. Her movements were quick and precise, her tiny fingers flying across the controls as she began to override the system. Jack watched, leaning against the wall. So, what exactly are you sending? A distress call? Coordinates? A strongly worded complaint? Lyria didn't look up. A secure transmission to my people, informing them of my location and current status. And what's the ETA on your cavalry? Depends, she said, her tone clipped. Assuming the signal gets through without interference, they could arrive within a day or two. A day or two? Jack groaned. That's an eternity in this part of space. Feel free to leave any time, she said, not bothering to mask her annoyance. Tempting, Jack replied, crossing his arms. But I'm starting to think you'd miss me. Lyria paused, casting him a withering glare. Don't flatter yourself, Before Jack could fire back, the console emitted a sharp beep, followed by a burst of static. Lyria's expression shifted from smug to concerned in an instant. "What's wrong?" Jack asked, straightening up. "Something's jamming the signal," she said, her fingers flying across the controls. "It's local. Someone doesn't want us broadcasting." "Great," Jack muttered, drawing his pistol. "Guess that means we've got company." As if on cue, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the station. Jack's grip on his weapon tightened, and Lyria scowled. "I knew this was a trap," she said. "You and me both," Jack replied. "Looks like we're improvising again." Lyria leapt back onto his shoulder as he moved through the station, his steps quick but silent. The flickering lights above cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the air felt heavier with every passing second. "Any bright ideas?" Jack asked. "Keep moving," Lyria said. "We need to find a way to disable the jammer." Jack sighed. "Why is it never easy with you?" "Blame yourself. You're the one who dragged me into this mess." Their bickering was cut short as a group of armed mercenaries rounded the corner. Jack didn't hesitate, firing off a shot that sent the first thug sprawling. The rest dove for cover, their weapons trained on him. "Get us out of here, Spitfire!" Jack yelled, ducking behind a crate. "I'm working on it," Lyria snapped, leaping down to a nearby terminal. Her fingers moved with lightning speed as she tried to override the jammer, all while Jack exchanged fire with the mercenaries. "Any time now!" Jack shouted, narrowly avoiding a plasma bolt. "Do you ever stop complaining?" she shot back, her focus unwavering. Jack grinned despite the chaos. "Not really!" The terminal beeped, and Lyria let out a triumphant shout. "Got it! The jammer's down!" "About time," Jack said, grabbing her and making a run for it. The mercenaries shouted after them, but Jack didn't look back. They sprinted through the station, the sounds of pursuit fading as Jack slammed a door shut behind them. He leaned against the wall, panting. "Well," he said between breaths, "that wasn't so bad." Lyria glared at him, her silver skin shimmering faintly. "You're an idiot." Jack grinned. "Maybe. But I'm your idiot," she groaned, muttering something in her native tongue. Jack didn't need a translator to know it wasn't a compliment. They reached the outer docks of the relay station, the metal doors sliding open with a groan. Jack's pulse quickened, but he remained calm, keeping his eyes fixed ahead. "I'm not sure if I'm relieved or terrified," Jack muttered, glancing at Lyria. "Either we've got the whole station chasing us, or it's about to blow up." Lyria's voice was a low hiss. "Given your track record, I'm betting on the explosion." Jack laughed under his breath, but his attention was on the docking bay outside. The ship was a short run away, but between them and freedom were half a dozen mercenaries, armed and looking like they had all the time in the galaxy to kill them. "Okay, time to think fast," Jack muttered to himself. "You think?" Lyria's sarcastic tone barely registered as he pulled his gun from its holster and started plotting his approach. "Don't start with me, princess," he snapped. "I'm figuring this out." He ducked behind a large container, trying to keep his movements as quiet as possible. The mercenaries hadn't spotted them yet, but it wouldn't be long. "We can't outrun them, and we sure as hell can't shoot them all," Jack said, turning his head slightly to meet Lyria's eyes. "Got any ideas?" Lyria smirked, as if the thought of him asking her for help was some cosmic joke. "Do you trust me?" Jack stared at her. "Of course not." Her smile grew. "Then it's a perfect plan." "I'm scared to ask, but I'll bite. What's your idea?" "We're going to make a distraction," Lyria said simply. "A distraction?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "How the hell do you plan to distract 6 armed mercenaries?" Lyria's smirk deepened as she pointed toward a stack of crates at the far end of the bay. "You see that?" Jack squinted, trying to follow her finger. "What, the crates?" "Yeah, I see them." "What's your point?" "Underneath those crates," she said slowly, "there's a small fuel leak." Jack froze. "Wait, you're suggesting we blow up the crates?" What is this, an action movie? Lyria raised her brows at him. What's your point? You are insane, Jack said, shaking his head. But okay. Let's do this. He waited until the mercenaries were focused on the far side of the bay before signaling Lyria. She hopped off his shoulder and disappeared into the shadows, small but quick. He didn't have to look to know she was at work, her nimble hands easily manipulating the machinery to trigger the leak. The tension in the air was palpable as Jack kept watch, gun raised. I hope you know what you're doing, he muttered under his breath. Lyria's voice came from the darkness. You worry too much. Jack took a deep breath and waited. Every second felt like an eternity. He could hear the mercenaries' voices as they shifted positions, the tension building. Then, suddenly, an ear-piercing explosion rocked the station. The crates erupted in a blaze of fire and smoke, sending the mercenaries scattering in all directions. Jack didn't waste a second. Now move! He shouted, rushing toward the ship. Lyria was already there, her tiny form darting along the path as she skillfully navigated the chaos. They made it to the ship just as the last of the mercenaries regained their bearings. Jack punched in the code to initiate the hatch sequence, his heart racing as the countdown began. The ship's engines hummed to life. Get in! Jack shouted, holding the hatch open. Lyria scurried inside, and Jack followed suit, slamming the hatch just as the first round of fire hit the ship's hull. He didn't flinch. Instead, he rushed to the controls, flicking switches and bringing the ship's thrusters to full power. Hold on! He yelled, pushing the throttle forward. The ship lurched, blasting out of the bay and into the inky void of space. Behind them, the station continued to burn, a fiery beacon in the distance. Jack let out a breath of relief, leaning back in his chair. That was almost fun, he said, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. You call that fun? Lyria's voice cut through the quiet. I've been in less harrowing situations at my home planet's bureaucratic meetings. Jack chuckled. I don't know what's scarier, the fact that you survived all that, or the fact that you're a diplomat. I don't survive, Lyria said coolly. I endure. Jack turned his head toward her, a grin tugging at his lips. Endure, huh? That's a nice way to put it. She arched a brow. And you call yourself a rogue traitor? You barely made it out of that alive. Hey, I didn't nearly get us killed, Jack replied. You did the whole make it explode thing. I just flew us out of there. Really? Lyria said, unimpressed. Because all I saw was you fumbling with the controls while I did all the heavy lifting. Jack gave her a mock salute. Sure, princess. Whatever you say. She crossed her arms. You're lucky you're so charming, or I'd be inclined to leave you on some backwater moon for good. Jack winked. I'll take that as a compliment. As the ship sped away from the burning station, Jack allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had pulled it off, despite everything. But he knew deep down, this was far from over. And in this line of work, that meant things were about to get a lot more interesting. Where to now? Lyria asked, cutting through his thoughts. Home, Jack said, eyes fixed on the distant stars ahead. Let's get you back to your people. Home? Lyria scoffed. Please. Don't flatter yourself. We still have to survive long enough to make that happen. Jack's grin widened. Oh, I'm counting on it. The hum of the ship's engines became a soothing background to the tension between them as they sailed through deep space. The last few hours had been a whirlwind of chaos, but now, as they put distance between themselves and the burning wreckage of the relay station, the silence felt almost too comfortable. Lyria perched on the edge of Jack's makeshift pilot seat, her silver eyes narrowed as she studied the readouts. You've got a long way to go, don't you? She asked, her voice lacking its usual biting sarcasm. Jack didn't look up from the console, his fingers flying across the controls. It's a 2-day trip. We'll make it. I'm glad you're confident, she muttered. Because I'm not. Jack finally turned to meet her gaze, the edges of his mouth curling up. You know, for someone who claims not to like me, you sure seem to enjoy making my life more difficult. Lyria's eyes flickered with a mix of amusement and exasperation. Oh, don't flatter yourself. You're just a necessary evil for now. Charming, Jack replied, leaning back in his chair. But I think you're starting to like me. I've learned not to let your arrogance get under my skin, she said dryly. Jack chuckled, focusing back on the navigation system. Yeah, well, I'm pretty damn good at it. You'll be swooning before long. Lyria let out a small snort. If I wanted to swoon, I'd have joined the legions of other aliens who lost their minds over you. But I didn't. So here we are. Jack's expression shifted to a teasing one. I see you've done your research. More like observation, she said, tapping the side of her temple. I've been observing you ever since you rescued me. That's the kind of word I'd use for it, too. She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. So what happens when we get to my planet? You drop me off, take the money, and fly off into the sunset? Pretty much, Jack said, shrugging. Maybe I'll swing by a few places to do some shopping. Lyria raised an eyebrow. Shopping? You? For what? More junk? Hey, some people love the junk I sell, he said, feigning offense. Not everyone can appreciate a good artifact. She shook her head. What kind of artifact does a scruffy rogue like you collect? The kind that's got value, Jack said with a wink. And trust me, there's always a market for a rare find. Lyria tilted her head, her expression unreadable. So tell me, rogue trader, what exactly do you trade in? Is it all this? She gestured vaguely at the interior of the ship. Scavenged parts and dubious trinkets? He paused for a moment, then gave a rueful grin. Some of it's dubious. Some of it, well, let's just say I've got a talent for finding rare objects, even if the rest of the universe doesn't always appreciate them. Meaning? Jack's grin turned sly. I've got a few things in my inventory that would get me a nice little sum, if I can find the right buyer. Is this where the whole rogue trader thing gets complicated? Yep, Jack confirmed, nodding. You see, Lyria, not everything in my line of work is as straightforward as it seems. Lyria eyed him curiously. I'm sure there's more to it than that. You didn't get this reputation for nothing. Jack leaned forward, lowering his voice as if he were about to tell her a secret. It's not just about finding treasure, sweetheart. Sometimes it's about finding a way to get the treasure into the right hands, or the wrong ones, depending on who's paying. Lyria stared at him for a long moment. You really are a piece of work. Flattery will get you everywhere, he replied. But enough about me. Let's talk about you. What's your grand plan once we get to your homeworld? She hesitated, looking away. I'll meet with my people, get my position reinstated, and hopefully avoid starting a civil war. A civil war? Jack echoed, raising an eyebrow. That sounds complicated. It's an understatement, Lyria muttered. But I've spent my entire life working for peace. Sometimes it takes extreme measures to make it happen. So, you're a peacekeeper? Jack asked, raising an eyebrow. She narrowed her eyes. I've had to be. Politics aren't easy, especially when there are so many factions vying for power. I hear that, Jack said with a knowing look. And here I thought I had the hard job. All I have to do is steal stuff and run from angry people. Lyria's lips twitched at the corners. Stealing and running from angry people is half the problem. The other half is dealing with why they're angry in the first place. Touché, Jack muttered, realizing she had a point. They lapsed into a comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Jack, however, couldn't help but glance at Lyria again. Despite her constant complaints, her fiery personality, and her sharp tongue, there was something undeniably magnetic about her. So, what happens if we don't make it to your people in time? Jack asked, breaking the silence. She gave him a side eye, her gaze cool but thoughtful. I'd rather not think about that. Jack raised an eyebrow. Come on. You're telling me you've got no contingency plan? No plan B, Lyria said, her voice tight. If this doesn't work then... Jack nodded in understanding. Then we're both screwed. Got it. She glanced at him, meeting his gaze for a brief moment before looking away. I'm not used to needing help, Jack. But for some reason, I'm trusting you with this. Don't get used to it, he teased. Her expression softened, just a little. You're not as unbearable as you want people to think. Jack's grin returned. I'll take that as a compliment. Lyria rolled her eyes again but said nothing, and for once, Jack didn't feel the need to fill the silence with words. They were a long way from safety, and no one knew what would happen when they reached her home planet. But for the first time, Jack wasn't entirely sure that his future was as solitary as he'd always thought it would be. 2 days, Jack said after a moment, and we'll be there. Stay sharp. Lyria nodded, her gaze fixed out the viewport. I always do. Jack looked at her, realizing he was starting to believe her.